Next up on our panel, we have two members of the ASPC4 from the Asian Prisoners Support Committee, Nghiep and Borey, Peejay. They are formerly incarcerated community advocates, leaders, and healers who experienced the systemic immigration pipeline themselves and are currently at risk of being detained by ICE and deported. Despite the threats, they continue to educate the public and support formerly incarcerated community members and their families in accessing social services and finding employment. So if we could give a warm welcome.
Thank y'all for having us. Thank you for being here. So we're doing one thing right now that's really historic. We're breaking the minority myth, but we're also breaking the stigma of shame by speaking out, right? How often do we hold stuff in our community and save face? Saving face is so huge, especially growing up for me as a Chinese, Vietnamese, American. Family's like, don't you ever tell anybody about what happens in this house because you know what's going to happen, right? And then if that ever happens, guess what happens? It will shame you. Right? So shaming is a big factor in our community. So I just want to say thank y'all all for being here to let's break the shame. But I'm gonna hand it over to Peejay. I'll talk a little more, but I can talk for hours. I'll try not to.
He will. He will. So I am Peejay. I work with the Asian Christian Support Committee as a community advocate. I wanted to share a little bit about who we are, how we came about, and what we're doing today. Right? So APSC started out of what I would call the San Quentin 3. We had 3 individuals who was in San Quentin who was going through their own journey of transformation, their own journey of healing, of finding themselves, and they realized as they were going through this process that there's not a lot of program in the prison system that address the need of API community. And since we have come from so many different background of war, of trauma, of poverty, of just like evolving in some system in some kind of way, right? That we have very unique need that's not being addressed. And so one of the ideas was to start an ethnic study program in San Quentin. And so they did a proposal to the administration, and in response to their proposal, the administration saw them as a threat, and so they put them in solitary confinement and shipped them out of the prison. Oh, right. And while they were in solitary confinement, they reached out to the community. So a lot of the student in Davis responded to their requests. Activists like Yuri Kichiyama also respond to their requests, and their name is Eddie Zhang, Mike Knoll, and Rico Romero. And they started collaborating with the students and advocates from our community, so people actually went to the prison and met with them and talked with them and write to them and just figure out how they can best support these 3 individuals. And through community advocacy and through the support, they're actually home now. So they all came home, and Eddie actually decided that he's not going to give up on the idea of ethnic studies. So he came back to San Quentin. After he got on his parole, he came back. And so Key and I actually met Eddie while we were inside, also in San Quentin, go through our own process. And while we're there, they have like a health fair. I don't know if you know about San Quentin doing health fair. They do this health fair once a year. They actually help folks get chiropractors, take their blood pressure. It's just kind of promote health so that people know about health and take it more seriously, right? And so APSC was one of the individual community that actually was invited to do this Tai Chi. I was blown away because, through my journey of incarceration, and I was one of the youngest juvenile life in the prison system. So I went to prison when I was 14, and I'm pretty much raised in the system, right? And while I was there, I never see Asian people come in to do anything with API community, right? So the fact that they came in really blew me away. And I was so amazed, I was so inspired by what they shared, what they did, and what they're doing for our community, and then reaching out, that I wanted to be involved, right? And so we started talking about the dream of ethnic study. And so we end up keep pushing it, and eventually the administration allowed us to start the first ethnic study program, which is called Original True Self, Restoring Original True Self, Roots, right, knowing roots. So we're actually the first ethnic study program in the prison system throughout the country. So we're the only one right now, and we're hoping to expand it someday that people will get more. So since the origin of Roots, we have offered this program, even though it's about ethnic study through the lens of API community and our experiences. and learning about who we are. We open it to all populations, so we have people of all ethnic community come in and share, their experience with us and learn from us, and we all learn together, right? And also we also build leadership through the program. People get the chance to heal from their trauma, learn where their ancestors come from, learn about the history of why Asian community immigrated, especially Southeast Asian community immigrated to America, and what that was like for all of us, right? So I've learned, I didn't know that I came to America because Cambodia was bombed by US so much that it destabilized our community, that allowed people to rise to power. So that story was never told to me. I didn't know that, right? All I knew was people was killing my parents, and so they had to go to Thailand in order to escape, and I ended up in the United States because of it, right? But no one ever told me where my parents come from, what it was like for them, like what was the political climate, what was the condition at the time, right? And who was responsible? Like who's responsible? I never knew none of that stuff. So it was an eye-opening to be able to be in a program that taught me these things and help me heal from this trauma, right? I was very empowered, I was supported, I get to cry for the first time in front of some strangers, like I don't even know, but I did time with them. Like he said, like we don't show emotion to each other, especially the men. Right? I'm in a men's prison, people are like super hyper masculinity, and they're like, I don't want to show weakness. So it was a really healing moment to be able to be in those spaces where you can actually heal and really deal with the inner self, right? And so since then, what we learned through APSC, we learned that even though our community members transform themselves and they come home, that they still deal with the system. So a lot of them are picked up by ICE, and if they're not picked up by ICE and end up in the immigration system, they also end up in the reentry process, right, where a lot of them have done so much time in prison. Some have been in there with kids, 14, 15 like myself, and have been in prison for decades. So the world has changed, right? So people don't know how to navigate reentry. Now we have 12 staff from all volunteer program since 2002. We have 12 staff members now that are actually fully employed. And so we're doing a lot of work in reentry. We still do work in in-prison programming where we go inside the prison and teach a roots program, and also correspondence program to the women's prison. And we also do anti-deportation defense because a lot of our community members are going to the deportation pipeline. They are getting deported, and so those are the areas of work. So that's how APSC came about, and since I've been home, I have pledged myself to continue this work in my whole life, so now I'm here through the process. So that's kind of like where APSC come from, and that's why we do this work. So what I wanted to show you is, you see the migration. So this is a pipeline through the migration experience of coming to a country, to areas like what was said earlier about lack of resources and all this stuff is happening, and people end up in very bad condition, in gangs, in drugs, in life of crimes, right, to get through their experiences, and they end up in the prison system. But that prison system doesn't just keep them there. Like eventually, people do get out and they end up in the deportation process, and then there are like opportunity for them to get their freedom, come home, because some people do come home, and so they need the reentry support. But I've learned like through this process, this pipeline is real. We do get funneled through this process. You end up in very bad situations. For us, it's double punches. For U.S. citizens, if they complete their time to come home, they go to their family. The state sees them as you have paid your debt to society. Now you're okay to come back and join our community. For Southeast Asian community who's not a citizen, don't get that same treatment. They say, well, you got to go to ICE, and we're going to put you back in another detention, and then we're going to deport you later. So not only because they're not born in this country that they get punished again for the same crime, even though they have already paid their debt to society. So when I look at the system in this pipeline, I realize that the system does not treat people equally. And we actually tried to push a bill out earlier this year called the Home Act, and that was passed on both floors, Senate and Assembly, and the governor vetoed it. So we talked about earlier, I mentioned in the video, that most of us end up in these cities that is impoverished, that is in bad condition, and most people don't want to live there. The other piece about this whole thing is that during this era, there was the war on drugs, the tough on crimes, the prison boom, so more prisons were being built in California at the time, and then we treat youth very differently, right? At the time, there was this thing about the super predator. Kids are committing really bad crimes, so they call them super predator. So we demonize children, right? And that's why kids actually end up doing life sentences, like myself at 14. Like people don't know youth can actually do life in prison at 14. And we're the only country in the world that does that. No other country in the world does that. And we're supposed to be the most progressive. I've learned for myself that I used to think I was broken. My dad was suffering through the war, lost all his family members. My mom witnessed her whole entire family get butchered in the Khmer Rouge. And they have all the traumas. And they were talking about intergenerational trauma earlier. My dad was absent my whole life. And I used to feel really unloved. I thought like he didn't really care about us, right? I didn't know as a kid that my dad lost all his loved ones and that he used drugs, you know, and he isolated himself as a way to cope with his own trauma. I didn't know that. Growing up, I was like, oh, my dad doesn't care about us. He doesn't love us. He doesn't want to be a part of us, right? So I grew up really lost, really not knowing. But the thing is, my story isn't unique. Like, that's common for a lot of Southeast Asian community, right? And so we end up in the prison system. And so I'm going to just transition from there and let Key say a bit more what it's like for us in the prison system.
How many of you guys made a bad choice in your life? That's a rhetorical question, right? So imagine your bad choice that you made in your life led you to a place like this. One bad choice. But not only did it lead you in here, but imagine it follow you for the rest of your life. That is your new identity. That is who you are. That one bad choice. A child who does bad in school. What is that child labeled? A bad student, right? And that tends to follow them for the rest of their life. And so prison experience is no different. So I remember I got locked up when I was 17 years old. First time ever being incarcerated. It's a very humiliating, inhumane experience for a young kid. The process, everybody ever heard of being stripped out? So the process of stripping everything off your body, having another person examine you, point out things on you that only your mother might or parent might know, right? So we talked a little bit about trauma earlier, but that is another piece of trauma that a lot of formerly incarcerated people never talk about, especially in the Southeast Asian community, because it's shameful to talk about. You see on here it says receiving and releasing. It's rare that anybody get released, especially in the 80s, 70s, and 90s. Right? It was only too recent in the 2000s people are starting to go home. And the reason why? Economy, right? It costs, people don't know in San Francisco alone, it costs $1 million to incarcerate a youth for 1 year. Imagine what we could use that money for. How we could reinvest that or reimagine that. And then in Alameda County, it's $850,000. I remember when I got locked up, I went through, on this one case that I committed, I went to juvenile hall, youth authority, county jail, prison, and then immigration. I didn't know I was not a citizen when I committed my crime. I came here as a kid, don't have no, trauma has a thing where it helps you forget stuff, right? Like you don't want to remember things. I have pictures of me coming to the U.S., being in a refugee camp, but no remembrance of none of that stuff. Because I didn't want to remember. Part of me like protecting myself. Going in prison with all this trauma, what's ironic is that I was one of those people that live in one of those bad neighborhoods. So when I went to prison, I looked around, it was no different than the community I came from. Prison is just like the street that I came from. So it was like easy for me to adapt. And one of the best ways to adapt is to put on that mask. How often do we carry a mask? We all carry some kind of mask, right? Everything is fine, there's no issue, but in reality we're like crying sideways, right? Everybody heard crying sideways? No, it's basically like when you lay down and cry, right? How many of us actually show our feelings and emotions to our family members, to our friends. Some of us are brave enough to do it, while others of us are still fighting that fight, right? It's a losing fight, just to let y'all know. But receiving, when we first get locked up, the first thing they ask you, are you white, Mexican, black? And I'm like, do I look like that? And they're like, no. So we're gonna label you as an other. I'm like, what the hell is an other? Like, what's an other? I'm like, you're not one of those three, you're an other. So I didn't understand what an other meant, but I'm like, okay, I'm an other. I thought I was Chinese and Vietnamese, but I guess I'm not, right? In the prison system, an other could be Russian, could be any Asians, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, Laos. Also, you could be Guatemalan, you could be Puerto Rican, you could be Haitian. Like other is everybody that is not white, black, or Mexican. That is crazy. It's like internment camp. Like you go in there. Yeah, you might be considered Japanese, but your whole identity is like gone, wiped off, right? You're just one race. Prison is the same thing. Like when we first in California, everyone when we go to prison, we wear I call that a carrot suit. We're all wearing orange, and that's to take away more of your identity, who you are as a person. I still remember my prison number, J52482. That's like it's like tattooed into my soul in a sense, because without knowing your ID, you can't get a visit, you can't get your mail, you can't get your medication, you can't do a lot of things without knowing who you are. That's your new identity. One thing we don't have here is when somebody is released, if they are released in a sense, right? If they're not being deported, that's the difference between, like, I remember when I was getting released, when the governor's like, oh yeah, you're good to go. And I'm like, you sure about that? He's like, yeah. But I'm like, no, I'm gonna be picked up by immigration because I committed a crime when I was a youth, and they took away all my status, all my rights. And so everyone's like, you're going home, you're going out the gate to meet your family. Like, no, I'm not. I'm gonna be transferred over, handed over to immigration. They're like, what does that mean? I'm like, you don't have to deal with that, so you're good, right? But so what that means is, like, it said I had to tell my family, like, I'm not coming home. I'm going to get handed over to immigration to face deportation to a country I have no ties to. A country that actually tried to murder us. Well, that's like why we left the country. Try not to get murdered. But now you want to send me back to a country that was trying to murder us. Like, that doesn't make sense. But one thing I realized, they don't care. The U.S. government do not care if they send you back. I was getting sent back to Vietnam. They said Vietnam, like, I don't want you. And so what America does, like, hey, Japan, do you want this guy? Japan, like, hell no, we don't want this guy either. So, like, even though our country don't want us, that doesn't stop the U.S. government from trying to send us to different countries, right? So technically right now, me, Peejay, and the other two that was on here, Maria and Bun, at any moment, could be tomorrow, could be the next day, could be next month, could be going to work, going to the store, get picked up by immigration, face that deportation process. Imagine you be under surveillance every day of your life after the prison system, and that at any moment you could just be snatched up, thrown in a van, taken away from your family, your kids, everybody that you know. A place that you call home. Imagine having that stripped away at any moment. So one thing that we consider ourselves as stranded deportees, because we have a country that don't want us back, but we have a country that we call home doesn't want us to stay. So we're stranded in some sense. So my job, I do the reentry service work. So when people come home that has situations like myself, that doesn't have a birth certificate, because God, you know, I'm trying to get a real ID, you need a birth certificate, right? Or a passport. I don't have either, because I wasn't born here. And so, like, trying to navigate that. I remember when I first came home in 2016. No one was there to help me because my family couldn't understand the process. They're like, just go get an ID. Like, I can't just go get an ID. Why don't you just go to get a job? I'm like, I can't just go get a job because I have a felony. Right? And not only that, I don't have no ID. I understand all that hurdle. Then the other part of it is expectation. Like, how many of us put expectation on, like, or respect people, like, you did all that time, get up back on your feet, strap your shoes up, and good to go. It's so hard to overcome trauma. I did 23 years, from 17 years old to 40, basically. And basically all my life was inside institution. I spent more time inside institution than I ever done in society. Prison really transformed my life in a lot of different facets, good and bad. Somebody asked me, like, what is the biggest thing that you have to deal with since you've been home? For me, choices. In prison, we didn't have no choices. You either do this or that, or you don't, or go back in your cell. The other part of the choices is, like, how do I not go back to those old behaviors, right? It's so easy to go back to old behaviors. So easy to go back to yelling at somebody. It's so easy for me growing up, violence was normal. I don't want to be that same person. People in prison are people, not a number, not a label, are people that have mental health issues, traumatic histories in their life. Other thing that I learned about people in prison, a lot of them don't have support. And then to expect them to come out here and do right, it's hard. They came from nothing and come back to nothing. And the prison system doesn't help people change their life at all. So one thing that you guys can do today that is huge, that's transformational, is that you can help support to stop against deportation.
So San Quentin, we all know, have a history, right? It's a history as one of the most violent oldest prison in the world. And many people have died in San Quentin from prison violence. Today, San Quentin is actually the flagship of programs. In California, you can't find a prison with more program, right? And that is because community members have come into San Quentin to invest in people like myself. So since San Quentin has become the flagship program, many people have come home as community leaders. They graduated college, they got coding program, they got their trades, they became counselors, they become youth mentors, they become community advocates, you name it. Like we even have attorneys who came out and got their bar and stuff, and now get their license, they're working. So what the point I want to make is that before the prison system doesn't invest in rehabilitating people, but community did invest in rehabilitating people, give people another chance to heal, to give them that first chance, because some people never got that first chance, and now they're home and they do amazing work, right? So Key and myself, we serve hundreds and hundreds of families and communities in the Bay Area, and we love our work. We love what we do. The reason why I'm here and I'm sharing and I'm connecting with you all is because I want you to know that people like myself, and we're not the only one, because there's thousands of us in California right now who's facing deportation, who's doing great work in the community, and even though we have transformed our life, we're still at risk of deportation. And so right now we're trying to get a partner with the governor. Newsom could stop deportation. He could continue to support us and allow us to continue to do our work and be with our family, because that's where we want to be and what we want to do. And so we have a petition, people could sign it. You don't have to sign it, but if you feel inspired to support us, share it with the community members. Support effort, policy that invest in our community and not just put more of us in prison, because we don't belong in prison. We belong in the community. People who have mental health problems belong in mental health clinic. They need support. They should be going into mental health. They shouldn't be funneled into a prison system. It's like, okay, well, we don't want to deal with you, so just go there, right? I don't think that's the answer, and I think that just picturing the problem. The journey of 1,000 miles, take one step. Thank you for inviting us, and we'll have this respect with you.